الخلق أرفع رغبتي وإن كنت يا ذا المن والجود مجرما.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today, inshallah, God willing, I'm going to go over chapter 2. We'll summarize chapter 2 in a sense. Chapter 2 is the literature review, and it's going to cover the following aspects. Whenever you're doing a literature review for your master's or PhD or anything, you have to come up with what's called theory areas, okay? And then you have to organize the literature review into a methodical, way. So what I did is that I used time periods, reference to the OCC letters, significant event in the United States where the organizational or the comptroller currency acceptance letters 806 and number 867 corresponding to the year 1997 and 1999. So I used that as a focal point for the literature review. So I arranged it into 3 periods: the pre-approval period up to 1996, from the pre-Islamic era to the pre-approval period of 1996, and then the pre-approval period from 1997 to 2002. And this is basically covering from 1997 to 2002 when the letters were approved and the significant develops of that. And then after that, 2003 to the present. And it's basically a logical sequence. So your literature review should be in a logical sequence, and it should be focused on theory areas, okay? Focusing on your theory areas. So, and I got this from, I took a course from Dr. Guy, and if you don't know him, he's on the internet, and his talks, it's called the Dissertation Mentor, and I paid like $45 a month at the time, and his lessons really helped me develop and get through the literature review. I also had advice from a friend of mine, Brother Ahmed Cleaver, who passed away last year. Rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy on him. He also was instrumental in helping me develop the proposal for the program, and also in doing the literature review. There's no written amount of literature, there's no limit to the literature that you can put in your research. And what you have to do is cover, okay, you develop 3 or 4 theory areas around your topic, okay, and then you research the literature around those topics, and then you put it into a logical order, and you discuss the literature around those topics. And that's basically what I did. And since and whenever you have a topic that there's not much literature on, you still should find any topics related to it. So that's why you'll find Islamic banking, Islamic law. I'll have some books on Maqasid Shari'ah. I research literature on Islamic fatwas and these things. Anything related to develop your theory areas and explore what other scholars have said on your topic. And this is very important, is that you have to, not only your view, you should you should have contemporary and classical scholars supporting your or developing your theory areas, and this would help in giving a more rounded view and approach of the works that have done in your area. So the literature review is very important, And so you don't have to arrange it in this manner. You can arrange it in in different ways. You could do it by topic, or you could do it by eras or time periods, like I did, or you could do it another way. But if you need help in this area, I suggest the dissertation mentor. That brother, that guy is Dr. Guy is a real help. And I used him for about a year. He got me through the proposal stage. And one other point too, don't make a mistake like I made. Okay. Again, when you do your literature review, okay, in the data section, I did a very big boo-boo in a sense, is that I cut and pasted the literature review in the data section. All right. So very important for you future masters and PhDs is use cross-referencing. Make sure that you cross-reference your literature review. Don't cut and paste it anywhere in your document. You should use a cross-reference. Okay, reference your own paper. Because I basically got accused of self-plagiarism by one of my reviewers. Two other reviewers didn't see it as that big of a deal, but one of the reviewers basically said I self-plagiarized, if there is a thing as such. And so that was kind of a major thing. And so just make sure that you use a cross-reference, and don't, if you're going to use any part of your own data in any other section of your paper, cross-reference it, okay? Just like you would do if it was another author, cross-reference yourself, or make a note and refer to that section. Okay, now we're going to go down. This is the introduction. In every section, we started out with an introduction. I kept with a format to introduce the section, and this is where we introduced the reason or the background of the era, the theory areas, and the eras that the time periods that I selected. These letters were the focal point of Islamic banking in the United States. Acceptance as a feasible way of financing. So that's why I used it. This marked a new era for Islamic banking in the United States. The approval of these Islamic contracts enabled Muslims to purchase property without paying interest. The approval correspondences allowed the United States bank regulators in the United States. I really doubled. Some of these things weren't caught by the reviewers, but I'm catching a lot of things now. The approval correspondence allowed the United States bank regulators in the U.S. to recognize the lease-to-own and cost-plus Islamic contracts, but did not provide a measure to integrate these contracts into the conventional banking system. So here we have, although these were approved, they didn't give us the how to implement it into the system. So this was left up to the banks and to come up with a way to implement these rulings. As Islamic financial institutions offer these products to the public, they had to overcome challenges related to the contract language and execution. So these contracts had to remain Shari'ah compliant, and also comply with the U.S. banking regulatory guidelines. And so this section reviews the past, present literature concerning developing Islamic banking and Sharia compliant products in the United States. So I developed the theory areas in the literature review. Theory of contracts, one, Sharia compliant products, and so that's two of them. And as we go, you'll see what we're talking about here. And then the Islamic law, the Islamic Sharia, Islamic law concerning that theory of contracts. Muslims consider the Holy Quran. Here I had to include the Quran because this is where we have the prohibitions of riba, gambling, and in the Quran, and these are absolute prohibitions. And so it was worthy of mentioning the Quran. And as you see here, all right, I'm not going to go through every piece of literature, but just look at the highlights here, the prohibition of riba. So just look and see how when we discuss classical works, you could have went into the different, you know, what's called the tafsir of the Quran for these. But riba is something that's very plain and simple to understand. And so I didn't really want to go into the different mufassirin on how they, interpreted, or explain the Quran. Riba is plain and simple. All right. When it comes to money, riba on money. And we did here the kinds of riba. As you see, I'm developing um, the theory here. Okay, so riba nasiya. Here we have this is the riba based on money. When you have money, you loan someone money and you're getting more money. Okay, uh, there's gold and silver. Um, uh, discuss gold and silver, the proper way of dealing with that, and then riba al-fadl, which is the riba on products. And I actually should have, maybe I should have placed, well, gold and silver is okay by itself. I could have put that under riba al-fadl, right? But I kept it here because it's silver, gold and silver. Money is based off gold and silver. Riba al-fadl is there are 6 types of riba based on commodities or foodstuffs. This is the topic. You could have went into again the different madahib, the different ways. However, I kept it pretty much simple since in Islamic banking we're dealing more with riba nasiya, right? So that's why I didn't really develop riba fadl too much, and I didn't do a lot of discussion on it because we're dealing more with money and interest, riba nasiya. So here, let's go to the next section, issues in Islamic banking. These are actually, now these particular are books, again, and I'm discussing the topic. And at the head of each heading, I basically put the title of the book, and then the author, I start discussing the topic. And I used paraphrasing for the most part. I didn't use a lot of quotes. And this is something you have to really understand when you're doing your research, if you to avoid plagiarism. So if you're gonna change, mixing the words around, you have to reference it because that's paraphrasing, and you still be considered plagiarism. So you have to be very careful with that. And alhamdulillah, I was very thorough in avoiding that, except with the incidents of cutting and pasting my literature review in chapter 5 data section. I thought data, okay, since I collected data, literature review is part of data collection. I didn't think it mattered just putting it in the data section, but it did to 2 of the reviewers. So here, distinguishing the different types of contracts, and we have to be, and here distinguishing something I found. When you're studying the literature, you're going to find things, and this is where you bring them up. Bay' mu'ajjal, in murabaha here, and I found this, and I didn't know it. This is the difference, is that the buyer is informed of the profit margin in murabaha. In bay' mu'ajjal, the buyer is uninformed concerning the profit margin, and that's maybe why they call it the same. But these really look like riba transactions, and that's why many people can't really, determine it or distinguish them from the riba transactions. Murabaha, set profit sale, and I'll go ahead and tell you now, it has conditions. Conditions is that the cost must be known to the buyer, to the buyer as well. All right, the profit margin must be known, and when it's sold, that's one of the conditions in order for it to be considered a murabaha contraction or lawful transaction. All right. If these conditions aren't met, then the contraction is can be defective according to Hanafi school madhab, or it can be what's called batil, void, unlawful, voided, according to the other schools. Bay mu'ajjal, this is a disputed because the murabaha, the condition of this bay mu'ajjal, you could if you disclose, okay, got a little notification there. If you do not disclose the um, the cost of the product to the buyer, then this this is going to be a regular sell transaction. All right, so you can't really call it murabba. All right, anyway, let's go now. Continue. Don't want to be long-winded. Then we have the post-approval period for 1997 to 2002. This basically, the first section covered basically the classical, stuff, which is pretty much redundant. To the post period, this is where I really, had to develop post period and um, the post approval period from 1997 2002 and from 2003 to the present. This is where you really got into the literature, because this is where Islamic banking in the United States was being developed. Financial engineering. So this is financial engineering was one of the theory areas. So we had the contracts, the theory of contracts, financial engineering, right? And then covering the different books. These are different titles of books. You can look in the section, the literature, the bibliography. Mizan's Guide to Islamic Banking, very instrumental book. Books, you have to vary between journals, books. You need to vary the types of literature that you use in your literature review. Don't just stick to one. I use basically journals and books. And you have to use reputable books, not just anything. The quality of your literature that you're using has to be of a academic quality. And so in your literature review is discussion of these different parts. All right. And so here we get into different aspects of usury. And just to note, interestingly, there's there at the time, at one point in time, there was usury was divided into commercial interest and personal interest. So the scholars allowed personal interest. So like if you did personal loans, they only forbidded commercial interest used in business was only unlawful in the 17th century. There should be a reference in there. I found it, yes. If you go here to reference one of, the referencing here, you should find that in that reference I have here. Islamic banking in the United States or global should be conformed with original guidelines of buying and selling according to Islamic law. All right, so this developed in Viva Nasia, and then we have another book, Challenges Facing Financial Engineering. This is the theory area, okay. And then we have the post-approval period from 2003 to present. Hybrid contracts. As you can see, this is on the contracts, theory of contracts. Again, so we had Islamic law, theory of contracts, financial engineering, and so these are the 3 or 4. I have another one in there somewhere. Hybrid contract and Islamic banking. Here's the different literature. This is not going to be too long, so you can just scroll through that. I don't want to be long-winded for nothing. This is chapter 2, and so if you have any questions about that's self-explanatory. There's no point in going into the literature review. Also, when I made my points on different, I used these references in developing the analysis, data analysis. I use this also. It was very important. So you have to collect your data first, and then use your data to make your points, to make your defend or help answer your research questions. And anyway, that's so you can see through that. I don't think I'm going to go too much into that. Let's go to the next section. The literature that, again, this is like 35 pages, I believe. As you can see, in the contemporary areas, you have to, there were more works written on Islamic banking and more things you have to go into to develop your topic, or at least understand it. This is giving you a big idea of what you're dealing with. So you can see that. What else we have here? Some of the things I talked about in the conclusion, arbitration. Anyway, this 35 pages alone was dedicated to the literature review. It became a big portion, and it was mostly done in the post OCC letter periods, because that's the time that Islamic banking was really developing in the U.S. All right, let me see how much time. I spent 20 minutes on that, and I think I'm going to stop on that. And then we'll go into the thick of this on the next one.
إليك إله الخلق أرفع